You need to watch this if you crave chills down your spine. Welcome to Soul Studios. Here, true crime meets the unknown. Suspense lurks in every shadow, and supernatural forces whisper from the dark. We craft chilling, edge-of-your-seat short stories inspired by the eerie, the unexplained, and the most haunting mysteries. 3 new stories drop every week, each one darker than the last. Are you ready to step inside? Subscribe now before the next story finds you.
In the quiet mountain town of Pinehaven, Washington, 4 brutal murders between 1998 and 2001 left a community shaken and afraid. The killer was never found, and the case went cold, until decades later when journalist Emma Miller returns home to care for her ailing father and uncovers a long-buried clue that changes everything. The Black Pine Legacy is a slow-burn psychological thriller and true crime-style mystery that unravels a chilling puzzle hidden in the heart of a trusted community. As Emma digs deeper into her own past and the secrets of Pinehaven, she's forced to confront horrifying truths about the people she thought she knew, and a darkness that never really left the woods. If you crave suspenseful stories packed with twists, emotion, and shocking revelations, hit subscribe now. At Soul Studios, we bring you the darkest tales you were never supposed to hear. Turn on notifications and prepare to question everything. The Black Pine Forest seems endless and tranquil from a distance, a sea of dark conifers whispering in the mountain breeze. But beneath the canopy's shadow lies the memory of a series of gruesome crimes that shattered the peace of a small community. It was here, under these towering pines, that a nameless horror earned its title. Locals still recall the late 1990s with a shudder, the era of the Black Pine Killer, a phantom who stalked the woods and left behind a trail of mystery and blood. In the fall of 1998, the quiet town of Pinehaven, Washington, first learned it had a killer in its midst. Pinehaven sat at the edge of the Black Pine Forest, a remote woodland known for its dense groves of nearly black evergreen trees. The town was small and close-knit, the kind of place where everyone knew each other and doors were rarely locked. That changed when the first body was found just inside the tree line of Black Pine. Victim 1. October 1998, a 24-year-old hiker named Mark Hansen was found strangled near a popular trail. His camping gear was undisturbed, but his boots were inexplicably gone. The only clue was a set of footprints circling the site, as if the killer had walked around contemplating the scene. Victim 2, July 1999. Sandra Lee, a 34-year-old schoolteacher, failed to return from an evening walk. Her body was discovered in a clearing deep in the woods. Disturbingly, a silver locket she always wore was missing, and investigators suspected the killer kept it as a trophy. Victim 3, May 2000. Luis Ramirez, 19, disappeared while driving through town. His car turned up at a trailhead, and days later so did his remains. The crime scene was unnervingly tidy, with tire tracks that oddly resembled the pattern on police SUV tires, though that clue led nowhere at the time. Victim 4, March 2001. The last known victim was Lily Thompson, a 17-year-old high school senior. She vanished walking home from a friend's house at dusk. Her body was found at the base of a black pine tree not far from her own backyard. Like Sandra, Lily had a personal item missing, a delicate pendant engraved with her initials, which authorities never recovered. These murders were linked by their proximity to the Black Pine Forest and by subtle signatures, the careful staging of the bodies and the absence of certain personal belongings. As fear gripped Pinehaven, the press dubbed the unknown perpetrator the Black Pine Killer. Parents kept their children indoors and the once lively trails stood empty. Law enforcement from the county and state scoured the area for clues. For a time, FBI profilers even joined the hunt, suspecting that the killer might be someone with intimate knowledge of the area, possibly even someone from the community or law enforcement itself. Leading the investigation was Sheriff Alan Miller, Pinehaven's long-standing sheriff. Alan was a respected figure, a hometown man who had served the community for decades and was known for his calm, reassuring presence. He took the Black Pine murders personally, working long days and nights to catch the person responsible. Under his watch, roadblocks were set up, neighbours questioned and town meetings held to calm the frantic residents. Yet despite exhaustive efforts, no arrests were made. The killer seemed to vanish each time without leaving enough evidence. By late 2001, the murders mysteriously stopped. Pinehaven breathed a sigh of relief, but it was a tentative one. The Black Pine killer had never been caught. The case went cold, lingering like a dark cloud over the town. Families of the victims were left without answers. Sheriff Miller, in particular, was devastated by his failure to bring the murderer to justice. In the years that followed, Pinehaven tried to move on. The trails reopened, new families moved in, and the horror of those years slowly faded into local legend. But the Black Pine Forest never truly escaped its dark reputation, and neither did Alan Miller. Nearly 25 years later, in 2025, Pinehaven had regained some of its old warmth. For most residents, the Black Pine killer was a frightening tale from the past, something to warn teenagers about on late nights. Yet for those who lived through it, and especially for the victims' families, the wounds had never fully healed. Emma Miller, Sheriff Miller's only daughter, knew this all too well. She grew up in the long shadow of the unsolved case. Emma remembered being a child during that fearful period. She recalled waking late at night to find the living room light still on, and her father hunched over his case files at the kitchen table, the lines on his face etched deeper each time. As a little girl, she didn't understand the details, only that something terrible was happening, and it made her brave, gentle father become tense and distant. Alan had tried to shield Emma from the ugliness of his work, but in a town as small as Pinehaven, secrecy was impossible. She attended school with Lily Thompson. She'd seen the missing posters and the tears in her classmates' eyes the day after Lily's body was found. It left a mark on her, just as it did on the entire community. By 2025, Emma was 32 and living in Seattle, pursuing a career in journalism. She had moved away from Pinehaven for college and, in part, to escape the whispers that still clung to her family name. Sheriff Miller's daughter, people would say, the one whose dad never solved those murders. Alan Miller had retired a few years after the killings stopped, but he never truly let the case go. Every time Emma visited her hometown, she could sense those unsolved murders quietly weighing on him. He kept a small study in their old house, its walls still pinned with faded maps of the forest and boxes of case notes stacked in the corners. It was as if he was still searching for the clue that would break the mystery. That spring, Emma returned to Pinehaven to help her father recover from a mild heart attack. The health scare had frightened her. Alan was 67 now, and seeing him pale and weak in a hospital bed was a sobering reminder that he wasn't the invincible lawman of her childhood memories. Once he was discharged, Emma insisted on staying in town for a while to help him recuperate at home. Alan protested at first. He was never one to admit vulnerability, but secretly he was grateful for his daughter's company in the old house. For a few weeks, life was peaceful. Emma cooked meals, kept her father company, and even convinced him to take slow, doctor-prescribed walks around the neighbourhood. They talked more than they had in years, mostly about everyday things. Alan seemed keen to avoid the topic of his health, and notably any mention of his old work. Emma noticed he hadn't brought up the Black Pine case at all, a subject that used to slip into almost every conversation they had. She thought maybe he was finally letting it rest. However, Pinehaven is a small town, and Emma's presence did not go unnoticed. One crisp afternoon, as she stepped into the local pharmacy to pick up Alan's medication, she crossed paths with a woman she recognized immediately. Diane Thompson, Lily's mother. Time had streaked Diane's hair with grey and carved lines of sorrow on her face, but Emma could still see the woman who used to invite the neighbourhood kids over for cookies before tragedy stole her warmth. Emma offered a polite, sympathetic greeting. Diane stared at her for a moment with an expression Emma couldn't quite read. "You look just like him, you know," Diane finally said, her voice flat. Emma paused. "Like my father?" Diane's eyes were sharp. "Yes, like Alan." There was a heavy silence, and then Diane added in a hushed tone, "I suppose he's told you I'm crazy, that I've been saying things about him, about Lily, that I made it all up." Emma felt a chill. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm sorry, I don't know what you mean." She did know that over the years Diane had grown increasingly vocal that the police hadn't done enough. Some even said she accused Sheriff Miller of incompetence or worse, but Emma had always dismissed it as a grieving mother's anger. Diane stepped closer, lowering her voice further. "I know he loved those woods. He always drove out there, even when there was no reason. I saw his truck near our house the night Lily disappeared. Why was he there? Why?" Her tone wasn't accusatory so much as pleading for an answer. Emma's heart pounded. "I'm sure there were patrols," she stammered. "He was probably patrolling after sunset to keep everyone safe." Even as she said it, she realized how hollow it sounded. Back then, Pinehaven was under a strict curfew. Everyone was supposed to be indoors, and her father usually patrolled with a deputy, not alone. Diane gave a bitter smile. Patrols, right? She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Hands trembling, she pressed it into Emma's hand. "For years I tried to get someone to listen. Maybe you can. You're his daughter. Maybe you'll see what I saw." Before Emma could respond, Diane turned and walked away quickly, leaving her standing in the pharmacy aisle, the little paper burning in her hand. Emma unfolded it gingerly. It was a photocopy of a page from an old diary or notebook. The entry was dated April 3rd, 2001, a few weeks after Lily's murder. In a scrawled handwriting that Emma recognized as her father's, it read, "Still have it. Don't think they realize. It glitters in the moonlight out in the shed. I feel closer to them when I hold it." Emma felt the blood drain from her face. It glitters in the moonlight out in the shed. What was it? Closer to them? Her father's shed. Could he have been writing about evidence? Maybe Lily's missing pendant? Emma's stomach churned. Why would her father have Lily's pendant at all and keep it in his shed? She refolded the paper hastily and shoved it into her pocket, mind reeling. Diane Thompson's implication was clear as day. She believed Sheriff Alan Miller, Emma's own father, was somehow involved in Lily's death, perhaps in all of the Black Pine murders. It was an outrageous accusation. Emma's immediate reaction was to reject it. She felt a flash of anger at Diane for even suggesting such a horrible thing. Alan Miller had devoted his life to protecting Pinehaven. He was the one who organized searches and comforted the grieving. How could anyone think he was behind those killings? And yet, that note in his handwriting, Emma couldn't ignore it. She knew her father kept journals, but she'd never seen this one. Why would he hide a victim's jewelry? If the note truly referred to Lily's pendant, the only benign explanation was that he found it later and kept it as a personal reminder, which would be highly unprofessional and strange. The more sinister explanation lingered unspoken in her mind. He didn't find it. He took it. Emma left the store in a daze, nearly forgetting the medicine. As she walked home, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows of pine trees across the road. Every step closer to the house brought another memory. Her father coming home late, smelling of soil and pine. The time she noticed a smear of something like blood on his sleeve, and he muttered an excuse about helping a wounded deer. The nights he sat in the darkened living room, thinking she was asleep, with a haunted look in his eyes. She had always assumed those were the burdens of a man who felt guilty for not catching a killer. But now a terrifying alternative interpretation formed in her mind, that those were the burdens of a man hiding guilt for something far worse. Emma tried to calm herself. She needed facts, not innuendo and fragmented memories. As a journalist, she trusted evidence above all. She decided to do what she did best, investigate. That evening, after serving her father dinner and ensuring he took his pills, Emma excused herself, claiming she was going to catch up on some freelance work in the study. Alan, who had been unusually quiet since she returned from the store, simply nodded and retired early to his bedroom. Emma waited until she heard his door click shut. Her heart was racing. She slipped into his study and quietly closed the door behind her. The study looked much as it did in her childhood, cluttered with books, old police memorabilia, and those lingering case files. Alan never let anyone, not even her, sort through the boxes labelled Black Pine. They sat in a corner, collecting dust. She knelt by them now, hands trembling slightly, and carefully lifted the lid of the top box. Inside were stacks of folders, each with case numbers and names she recognized from news articles. Her father had kept copies of everything. Crime scene photos, which she decided not to look at too closely just yet, witness statements, autopsy reports. He had even kept newspaper clippings, some of her own early articles covering the 20th anniversary of the murders. Emma scanned the contents quickly, looking for any sign of something out of place. If her father had taken Lily's pendant, might he have hidden it here? But there was nothing obvious in the files, except a chilling record of the brutality of the crimes. Flipping through, she found the inventory list of Lily's personal effects from when her body was found. As Diane had insisted, it noted, necklace, silver pendant, initial LT, missing. A lump caught in Emma's throat as she gently set the file aside. She turned her attention to the rest of the study. On the desk sat her father's leather-bound journal, the one he always carried during his years on the force. Emma recalled him jotting down thoughts in it nightly. She picked it up and thumbed through the pages, which covered various cases over the years. When she reached 1998 and onward, his neat handwriting turned shaky in places. There were furious pen scratches where he'd scribbled out thoughts, sections with ink blots from a leaking pen, or maybe tears. One entry from after Mark Hansen's murder read, "No prints, no evidence. I fear this one will haunt me. Must do better." Another following Sandra Lee's death, "They expect me to protect them. How can I, against a ghost? Am I failing as a sheriff, as a father?" Emma asked why I missed her play. How do I explain? Emma felt a pang of sympathy reading this. It sounded like her father was under immense pressure, blaming himself for the killings. But then came later entries around 2000. One caught her eye. "Luis, I knew him since he was a kid. How many more? I'm so sorry." The next lines were scribbled over, then a gap, and a different pen ink took over days later. It was eerily calm. Perhaps the answer lies within. The forest shows its secrets only to those who know where to look. The phrasing was odd, almost poetic. Emma read it twice. Did he mean something figurative, or literally that he knew where to look? Her pulse quickened. She remembered what Diane had given her, that cryptic note about something glittering in the shed. If that note was real, it wasn't in this official journal. Could her father have kept a second private diary? Possibly one he hid away. Emma knew the house well. If Alan had something truly damning to hide, there were only a few places it could be. One was the old shed behind the house, which served as his workshop and storage. The other was in this very room, his locked desk drawer. She eyed the heavy oak desk. As a kid, she'd once snooped and discovered a spare key taped underneath one of the drawers. Taking a breath, she reached under the desk. Her fingers brushed against cold metal. The tiny key was still there. With a quiet click, the desk drawer opened. Inside lay a small wooden box that she had never seen before. It was unadorned, sealed with a miniature padlock. Unbelievably, the little key she had just used for the drawer also fit this lock. Her hands were shaking now as she lifted the lid. Inside the box, the first thing she saw was something shiny, a silver pendant on a broken chain, engraved with an elegant LT on the back. Emma's breath caught in her throat. She gently picked it up. It trembled between her fingers. It was Lily's pendant. She remembered Lily wearing this at school, and the day everyone noticed it was missing after Lily's body was found. And here it was, in her father's private strongbox. Emma set the pendant down, her mind racing with possible explanations, each one more damning than the last. Beneath the pendant, the box was lined with several other items. A gold wedding band. Mark Hansen was married. Her memory supplied numbly. A tiny heart-shaped locket frame with no photo. Sandra's keepsake, perhaps. And even a pair of weathered leather hiking boots, cracked and shrunken with age. Mark's missing boots from the first crime scene, she realized with horror. It felt as if the floor was tilting. Emma had to steady herself against the desk. There was no innocent explanation for this collection. These were the trophies of a serial killer. These were the very items the Black Pine killer had taken from his victims, items her own father had dutifully recorded as missing when he led the investigation. Her eyes blurred with tears. It was true. The unthinkable truth glared up at her from that box. Sheriff Alan Miller was the Black Pine killer. A muffled sob of anguish and anger rose in her chest, But Emma clamped a hand over her mouth. She couldn't break down now. She needed to stay composed and figure out what to do next. The man in the next room, sleeping off a heart attack, wasn't just her ailing father. He was a cunning murderer who had fooled an entire town for decades. Emma's first instinct was to scoop up these items and run straight to the authorities. But then she realized, aside from her, who would believe this without question? Actually, many might. After the initial shock, the evidence was literally in her hands. But if she alerted the police right now, they would come to arrest Alan immediately. A swirl of conflicting emotions hit her. This was her father, the man who read her bedtime stories and taught her how to ride a bike. Turning him in meant destroying the only family she had left. Yet how could she not? The families of the victims deserved justice. Lily, Mark, Sandra, Louise, their memories cried out for justice. And if Alan had gotten away with it all this time, hadn't he in a sense been a loaded gun in their midst? Who's to say he wouldn't kill again if provoked or given the chance? Emma forced herself to focus. She needed confirmation from the only person who could give it, Alan Miller himself. She wanted to hear him say it, to explain why. Perhaps a part of her also desperately needed to see if there was any remorse in him, any humanity left to salvage. She carefully placed the items back in the box, except Lily's pendant, which she found herself slipping into her own pocket almost on impulse. Locking everything as it was, she crept out of the study. The house was silent. A glance at the clock in the hall showed it was nearly midnight. She steadied her nerves. She would confront him now. There was no way she could sit on this knowledge until morning. Emma walked down the hall to her father's bedroom and gently knocked on the door. "Dad?" she called softly. No answer. She knocked a little louder. "Dad, I need to talk to you." She heard rustling, then the door opened. Alan stood there in his pajamas, blinking under the hallway light. "Em, what is it? Are you okay?" he asked, concern in his groggy voice. Looking into his eyes, so familiar, so full of paternal care, Emma felt her resolve waver for an instant. How many times had those eyes looked at her with love? But she recalled the contents of the box and steeled herself. "No, Dad, I'm not okay," she said, her voice strained. "I need to show you something, in the study." Alan's brow furrowed in confusion, but he followed her down the hall. In the study, Emma went straight to the desk and opened the once-locked drawer. She lifted the wooden box out and set it atop the desk blotter. Her hands were shaking visibly now. "What's this?" she asked quietly, looking him in the eye. Alan's face changed instantly. The mild puzzlement vanished, replaced first by surprise and then by an awful understanding. His ruddy complexion seemed to drain to ashen grey. "Emma, why are you going through my things?" His voice was low, almost a whisper, carrying a note of warning. Emma swallowed the lump in her throat and flipped open the lid of the box. The contents glinted under the lamplight. Alan's hand twitched as if he wanted to snatch it away, but he restrained himself, shoulders stiffening. "Why do you have these, Dad?" Emma's voice trembled despite her efforts to keep it steady. "That's Lily's necklace, Mark's ring and boots. These are things that only the killer would have." Alan closed his eyes, a pained expression crossing his face. For a moment the only sound was the distant call of a night bird outside. When he opened his eyes, there were tears welling in them. "I wanted to remember them," he began haltingly. "Each of them." "Remember them," Emma repeated, incredulous and growing angry. "These were evidence from the murders. These belonged to people who died on your watch. You didn't turn them in. You kept them hidden." Her voice was rising, her hurt and betrayal coming out as fury. Alan took a step forward, hands out in a calming gesture. "Lower your voice," he urged softly, glancing toward the door as if concerned someone might overhear. "The reflex of a sheriff, even now. I can explain, Emma. I never wanted you to find out like this." Emma blinked back hot tears. "Explain?" she cried, but then caught herself and forced her volume down to a hush whisper. "Fine, explain. Did you kill them?" The directness of her own question made her heart lurch. She realized deep down she still hoped he'd deny it, laugh even, call her crazy, anything to indicate this was all a terrible misunderstanding. Alan's jaw tightened. He glanced at the open doorway, then at Emma. His eyes were pleading. "Let's go for a drive," he said suddenly, quietly. "I'll explain everything, but not here." Emma stared in disbelief. No, explain right now, she insisted, though her voice quavered. She had a flash of fear. His demeanour was shifting unpredictably between guilt, panic, and something darker. They were alone. He was cornered by her questions. Alan's gaze hardened just a bit, a look she recognised from times he was being stubborn. "Not here," he repeated more firmly. "It's not safe." Before she could process what he meant, Alan reached into the open desk drawer. Emma's breath caught. For one wild second she thought he might pull out another keepsake or evidence. Instead, his hand emerged gripping a steel-grey object, his old revolver. The very firearm he'd carried as sheriff, now pointed loosely in her direction. Emma's blood turned to ice. "We need to take a ride, Em," he said, using the old affectionate nickname. His tone was eerily calm, almost gentle, as if this were just a midnight father-daughter outing. The gun in his hand told a different story. Now. Emma's heart hammered. Her father, or this stranger in her father's skin, was armed, and he had just confirmed in his own way that everything she feared was true. She was in mortal danger, yet she also sensed that if he intended to kill her outright, he could have done it already. He seemed to want to get her away from the house. Think, Emma, think. If she screamed, would anyone hear? Unlikely. The nearest neighbour was a quarter-mile away. If she ran, could she outrun a bullet? No. For the moment she decided to play along, to keep him talking and hopefully get to a public place or create an opening to escape. Trying to quell her shaking, Emma nodded slowly. "Okay, Dad," she said softly. "Let's go for a drive." He gestured with the revolver for her to move, and together they walked out of the study. Emma's mind raced. Should she try to grab her phone off the kitchen counter on the way out? As they passed the darkened kitchen, her eyes flicked toward it. But Alan was right behind her. He noticed. In an instant, he reached past her and slid the phone off the counter, tucking it into his pocket. "No phones," he said quietly. "Just you and me. We'll talk, I promise." He nudged her toward the front door. Emma's heart sank. Now she had no way to call for help, except maybe not no way. Earlier that evening, after Diane's confrontation, Emma had sent a quick, cryptic text to Sheriff Steve Holt, her father's former deputy and close family friend. It said, "I have a lead on Black Pine case. Confronting Dad tonight. If I'm not back by morning, come to the house." It was a long shot, and she hadn't received a reply. Steve might not even have seen it yet, but it was all she had. The cool night air hit Emma's face as Alan guided her onto the porch. The world outside was silent, bathed in pale moonlight. He gestured to his old pickup truck parked in the drive. "Get in," he ordered softly, eyes darting around to ensure no late-night dog walkers or passers-by were in sight. Of course, the street was empty. Emma climbed into the passenger side of the truck's cab. Alan slid in behind the wheel, keeping the gun in his right hand resting on his thigh. With his left, he turned the ignition. The engine rumbled to life, startlingly loud in the quiet. As the truck rolled down the driveway, Emma took one last look at the house, wondering if she'd ever see it again. They drove in tense silence through the sleeping town. Alan avoided the main streets, taking back roads that led toward the forest. Emma's mind churned with a toxic mix of fear, grief, and confusion. She had so many questions, and she needed to keep him talking. People often reveal the most when they're speaking. Maybe he'd slip up or get distracted. She cleared her throat, finding her voice. "Dad, how could you do it?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Those people, they trusted you. I trusted you." Alan's eyes stayed fixed on the road ahead, which was now winding beyond the town limits and into the dense pines. "You wouldn't understand," he replied after a moment, his tone resigned. "Then help me understand," Emma pressed gently, glancing at him. The side of his face was lit intermittently by the pale glow of the dashboard, highlighting the lines and creases. He suddenly looked very old to her, very human. She noticed his knuckles white on the steering wheel. He swallowed hard. "I never wanted you to know about any of this," he said. "God, not you." He sighed, a shuddering sound. "Everything I did for the town, to keep it safe." Emma felt a flare of anger. He's still lying to himself. "Safe," she repeated, incredulous. "Dad, you murdered innocent people. How on earth is that keeping anyone safe?" Her words came out sharper than she intended, and he shot her a warning look, so she quickly added, "Just tell me why. I need to hear it from you." He was quiet for a long moment, just the crunch of gravel under the truck's tires as they entered the forest road. Finally he began, voice low and gruff. They weren't all innocent. Emma's brow furrowed. What do you mean? Alan tightened his grip on the wheel. Mark Hansen, he said, and for the first time she heard an edge in his voice. He wasn't just some random hiker. That summer before it happened, I caught him lurking at the campground with a camera. He had taken inappropriate photos of kids, Emma. I ran him out of town, told him if I saw him again, I'd arrest him. But a few months later I saw him near that same trail where he died. He laughed when he saw me, like it was a joke. I knew what he was, and I wasn't going to let him hurt anyone else. Alan's tone as he recounted this was chillingly matter-of-fact, and for a second Emma glimpsed the righteous conviction that must have fueled him back then. She struggled to digest this. Had Mark truly been a predator? There had been no such allegation at the time. It sounded plausible, yet horribly convenient as a justification. Even if that's true, she said carefully, why not arrest him? Why kill him? He hadn't done anything in our jurisdiction yet. Alan snapped, a flash of frustration. Maybe I should have arrested him for trespassing or whatever and hoped a judge locked him up. But I knew he'd be back out. People like that. They slip away. So I made sure he wouldn't come back again. I made sure no child in Pinehaven would ever suffer by his hand. Emma's mouth had gone dry. Her father hadn't denied killing Mark. He'd admitted it outright, justified it. He truly believed he'd delivered vigilante justice. Her voice trembled. What about Sandra Lee? She was a school teacher, for God's sake. What threat was she? Alan's jaw clenched. They were deep in the forest now, the truck's headlights tunnelling through thick stands of trees on either side. Sandra, he muttered, almost spitting the name. Sandra wasn't as innocent as everyone thought. She was blackmailing Luis. Emma's eyes widened. Blackmail? Luis Ramirez? He was just a teenager. Alan gave a bitter chuckle. Just a teenager, yes. But he got into some trouble. He got involved with Mrs. Lee in ways he shouldn't have. He glanced at Emma, then back to the road. I found out Sandra was having an inappropriate relationship with Luis, and when he tried to end it, she threatened to accuse him of attacking her. She had letters, photos. It would have destroyed his life. I intervened. I told her to leave town or I'd expose her. Emma's head was spinning. It was like hearing an alternate history of the town, a dark underbelly only her father knew, or perhaps a web of self-serving lies he was spinning to excuse the inexcusable. So you killed her, she stated, voice flat, to protect Luis and stop her from telling lies. I confronted her out in the woods, tried to reason with her, Alan said, a strange softness creeping into his tone as if he was remembering something painful. She attacked me, scratched my face. She said she would make sure Luis and I both burned for what we'd done. I snapped. His knuckles drummed the steering wheel. Next thing I knew, she was on the ground, dead. He said it as if it had been an accident, but Emma wasn't naive. You strangled her, she said, each word like a stone in her throat. You strangled her, and then staged it to look like the same killer had done it as Mark. Alan didn't reply directly, but his silence was an admission. Emma felt sick. She was hearing everything now, the truth, filtered through the killer's warped mind. She pressed on. And Luis? You claim you were protecting him, but he ended up dead too. Why? A shadow crossed Alan's face. Luis, that was never part of the plan, he murmured. The guilt was eating at him. He figured out that I had something to do with Sandra's death. The way I hinted he was safe afterward, I think he knew. One night he came to me, furious and drunk, saying he was going to confess everything to the state police. He pulled a knife on me, called me a monster. I tried to calm him, but he lunged, reacted. Alan's voice cracked. He was just a kid, and I broke his neck. Emma shut her eyes, tears slipping down. Her father had murdered Luis too, in cold blood or self-defense. It hardly mattered now. A young man he claimed to treat as a son. She felt numb. You staged him as a victim of the serial killer as well, she said dully, finishing the story. It all fit the timeline. Yes, Alan whispered. After Luis, I realized I was in too deep. I had to make it all look like the work of one unknown madman. I moved his body. I made it look like the others. I thought that would be the end. There was no one left threatening our town. I could stop. They were nearing a clearing in the heart of the forest, the old abandoned ranger station. Emma recognized. This was the very spot where search parties had once coordinated during the Black Pine killer manhunt. The irony made her skin crawl. "What about Lily?" Emma asked, voice frail. This was the one that hurt the most. Lily, her schoolmate, a bright, kind girl whose only misfortune was living in the wrong town at the wrong time. What threat did Lily possibly pose, Dad? She was innocent. He opened his door. "Come on," he said softly, gesturing with the gun for her to exit on her side. "I need to show you something." Emma stepped out of the truck, legs shaking. The clearing was eerily quiet, except for the creaking of tree boughs in the night breeze. A sliver of moonlight illuminated the derelict ranger station cabin, its windows boarded up and weeds curling around its foundation. Alan walked a few paces away, breathing deeply as if gathering his thoughts. Emma surreptitiously looked around for any chance of rescue. Nothing but dark trees and silence. She was on her own with him out here. Unless... Had Steve gotten her message? Could he have followed? If so, where was he? Alan turned to face her, about 10 feet of distance between them. He still held the revolver, but it hung by his side for the moment. His expression was heavy with sorrow and a strange relief. "I never wanted any of this, Emma," he spoke into the night. Not the murders, not this moment. He looked around at the trees, the place where his double life had played out. For years, I woke up every day praying it was all a nightmare. But every day, the proof was there. Those trophies, those files, those grieving families I had to lie to. And you always looked at me like I was a hero, and that killed me more than anything. Emma listened, her heart aching with a confusing mix of hatred and love for this man. "You should have turned yourself in," she said, her voice raw. "You should have paid for what you did." He gave a hollow laugh. "Perhaps. I thought about it 1,000 times, but I couldn't bear the thought of leaving you without a father and your mother without a husband. Then when your mom got sick, I couldn't add to her pain." He wiped his nose with the back of his hand. "After she passed, I nearly did it then. But by that time, you were off at college, thriving. I told myself, let Emma have a normal life. Let her think her dad's a good man at least until I'm gone." Emma shook her head slowly. "A normal life built on lies isn't normal, Dad. It's all tainted now." She glanced at the revolver in his hand. "What happens tonight? Were you planning to kill me too, to keep your secret?" Her voice quivered on the last words. She had to ask, had to know what he intended. Alan's face contorted, and he looked genuinely horrified. No, Emma, I don't want to hurt you. I would never want to hurt you." He took a step forward. Emma instinctively took one back. He stopped, seeming to realize how menacing he looked with the gun. He slowly laid it on an old tree stump nearby, within reach but not directly pointed at her. Emma's eyes flickered at the gun, noting its position. I didn't know what to do," Alan continued. "When you found that box, I knew the jig was up. Part of me felt relief that finally someone knew. But I was afraid too, afraid of what it would do to you if you told the world." Emma swallowed. "Don't put this on me. You were afraid of facing justice." He nodded faintly. "Yes, I was. After all these years of evading it, I was damn afraid to face it." He looked down at his hands. "I thought about ending it. So you wouldn't have to endure a trial or the shame. If I just disappeared, maybe the truth might never need to come out. But you deserve the truth, Emma, and so do the families." He looked up at her, eyes red. "I'm tired of lying." Emma stood there in the dark clearing, trembling from adrenaline and the night chill. Her father had finally admitted everything. And oddly, he seemed almost ready to accept the consequences. A silence fell between them, heavy with all that had been said. An owl hooted somewhere in the distance. Suddenly, flashing lights sliced through the trees, red and blue strobes dancing across the trunk of the ranger cabin. A voice boomed, startling birds from their roosts. "Alan Miller! This is Sheriff Holt! Drop your weapon and step away from Miss Miller!" Emma gasped and spun toward the voice. Emerging from the tree line at the edge of the clearing was Sheriff Steve Holt, pistol drawn and aimed. Behind him, another officer held a shotgun at the ready. They must have arrived in stealth, parking down the road and approaching on foot to avoid tipping Alan off. Relief and fear flooded Emma in equal measure. Help was here, but would it push her father to do something desperate? Alan, for his part, visibly tensed. He grabbed the revolver off the stump, but he didn't point it yet. "Steve," he called out, his voice carrying a note of almost amicable disbelief. "Had a feeling you might show up." "Alan, it's over," Steve shouted, stepping closer with cautious, measured steps. "We know everything. We heard enough." In the glow of the cruiser lights now filtering into the clearing, Emma could see Steve's face. It was stricken, a mix of heartbreak and determination. He must have heard at least part of the conversation. Alan's shoulders slumped slightly. A ghost of a smile played on his lips. "Of course you did." He turned to Emma, who was now halfway between him and Steve. "You texted him, didn't you?" Emma nodded shakily, tears forming again. "I did. I had to, Dad." Alan actually let out a small chuckle. "Good girl," he murmured, strangely proud. Then in an instant his expression hardened with resolve. He looked back at Steve, who was now maybe 20 feet away, gun trained on Alan's chest. The second officer was circling to flank. "Drop the gun, Alan," Steve commanded. "Don't make this any worse, please." His voice softened on the plea. Alan glanced at the revolver in his hand as if surprised to find it there. He then looked at his daughter, taking her in, as though memorizing her face. "You know I love you, Emma," he said calmly. "Everything I ever did, twisted as it became, it was in some way for you. I'm sorry I failed you." Emma's throat burned with emotion. "Dad, just put it down. We can fix this. She caught herself. There was no fixing this. "Please, just put it down," she repeated weakly. Alan closed his eyes for a brief moment, then opened them and gave Emma one last look. There was a kind of peace in his eyes that terrified her. He nodded to himself, then called out to Steve, "You're a good man, Sheriff, better than me. Take care of my girl." Before anyone could react, Alan raised the revolver, not toward Emma, but in the direction of Sheriff Holt. Multiple things happened in a split second. Emma screamed, "No!" Steve shouted, "Drop it!" And a gunshot cracked through the night, followed by another. Emma wasn't sure who fired first, but she saw a blossom of red burst from her father's chest as Steve's bullet struck him. Alan's own shot went wide, whistling off into the trees. For a heartbeat, Alan remained standing, a look of surprise on his face. Then his knees buckled and he collapsed onto the forest floor. "No!" Emma cried, rushing forward and throwing herself down beside her father. Behind her, Steve and the other deputy cautiously approached, guns still drawn, but the threat was over. Alan's revolver lay in the dirt a few feet from his outstretched hand. Emma cradled Alan's head in her lap. He was coughing blood, eyes unfocused. "Dad, hold on," she sobbed, pressing trembling hands against the bleeding wound in his chest. It was bad. Her hands were already slick with warm blood. Alan's eyes found hers. In them she saw pain and love and regret all at once. "Em," he gasped, each breath gurgling. She leaned closer, tears dropping onto his cheek. "I'm here, Dad. I'm here," she whispered, voice breaking. He weakly raised his bloodied hand, shaking as he reached toward her pocket. To her surprise, he pulled out Lily's silver pendant that she had taken. His fingers curled around it, and with the last of his strength he pressed it back into Emma's hand, closing her fingers over it. A faint smile touched his lips. "I'm so sorry," he managed to say. His eyes locked with Emma's, pleading for forgiveness or understanding or both. Fresh tears streamed down Emma's face. In that moment, despite everything, she saw not the killer, but her father, the man who sang her lullabies and taught her to fish and cried at her high school graduation. A part of her heart broke free and forgave him, even as another part would hate what he'd done forever. "I know," she whispered. "I know, Dad." Alan exhaled a shaky breath. His gaze drifted upwards toward the swaying treetops and the stars beyond. "It's finally over." He breathed so softly Emma barely heard it. Then, with a last shudder, Sheriff Alan Miller, the Black Pine killer, fell still in his daughter's arms. Emma bowed her head over him, sobbing quietly as the blue and red lights painted the clearing. Sheriff Holt cautiously checked Alan's pulse, then stepped back, solemn. He holstered his weapon and spoke gently. "He's gone." The other officer was already on the radio calling in the incident. Steve knelt beside Emma and put a hand on her shoulder, his own eyes wet. Emma didn't react. She just clutched Lily's blood-stained pendant in her fist and rocked slightly, the forest around her eerily echoing with the long-overdue cry of truth. The events of that night would forever mark Pinehaven's history. By dawn, news of the confrontation in Black Pine Forest had spread through town like wildfire. The decades-old mystery of the Black Pine killer had been solved in the most shocking way imaginable. In the days that followed, investigators swarmed the Miller residence. What Emma had discovered was quickly verified by law enforcement. Alan's secret box of trophies, his private journals hidden in a padlocked trunk in the shed, just as Diane had suspected. Each page was a chilling puzzle piece sliding into place, detailed accounts of how he chose his victims, his justifications, the anguish and occasional pride he took in eluding capture. The truth was laid bare. The beloved sheriff had been living a double life as the murderer he'd supposedly been hunting. Pinehaven's residents grappled with conflicting emotions. Many felt an overwhelming sense of betrayal. How could the man who swore to protect them have been the source of their terror? Some, remembering the kind neighbour and friend they knew in Alan, struggled to reconcile that image with the monster described in the reports. The families of the victims met the revelations with a mix of grief and grim vindication. Diane Thompson, who had never stopped voicing her suspicions, told a reporter through tears, "I knew something was wrong back then, I just knew, but no one believed me." She reached out to Emma privately, not to gloat, but to share condolences. Both women had lost someone that night. Emma's life was thrown into turmoil. She was hailed as the whistleblower who cracked the case, yet she also had to endure whispers and stares as the daughter of a serial killer. The world wanted details. Reporters camped outside her door and besieged her with interview requests. In the true crime community, the story became an instant sensation. People dissected Alan Miller's psyche, the red flags that were missed, the tragic irony of a sheriff turned murderer. Through it all, Emma remained largely silent, issuing only a brief statement to the press. "My father's actions were heinous and inexcusable. I am as shocked and horrified as anyone to learn of the true identity of the Black Pine killer. My heart goes out to the victims' families, and I ask for privacy as we all process these events." After that, she retreated from public view, taking refuge with a close friend in Seattle for a time. Pinehaven slowly began the healing process. A candlelight vigil was held in the town square to honor Mark Hansen, Sandra Lee, Luis Ramirez, and Lily Thompson. Hundreds attended, weeping and embracing as they finally spoke openly of the fear they'd lived under and the bittersweet relief that the mystery was solved. Some candles were also lit for Alan Miller, not in honor of what he'd done, but in acknowledgement of the complicated loss the town felt. He had been a pillar of their community, and in one night that pillar crumbled to dust. Sheriff Steve Holt addressed the crowd that evening, voice wavering as he said, "We share a collective grief and shock. Alan Miller was my mentor and my friend. I never imagined he was capable of these crimes, but the evidence does not lie. Tonight, we remember the victims, and we reclaim our sense of safety and truth. Pinehaven will not be defined by the evil that happened here, but by how we come together to support each other now." His words resonated. Neighbors who had stayed distant out of old fears began speaking to one another again. The healing had begun, slow but sure. As for Emma, months passed before she could even begin to sort out her feelings. She attended therapy, where she tried to reconcile the loving father she lost with the killer he truly was. Every memory from her childhood felt suspect. Every affectionate moment was now cast under the long shadow of his secret. In quieter moments, she often found herself absent-mindedly rubbing the silver pendant engraved LT that she now kept with her. It had become a symbol of both her father's crimes and her own resolve to seek truth and closure. Driven by that resolve, Emma eventually took to her keyboard and began to write. She poured out the whole story in her own words, the quiet town, the murders that haunted her youth, the clues that led her to the horrifying discovery, and the final confrontation in the moonlit forest. It was a harrowing process, but also cathartic. She refused to shy away from the ugliness, detailing the pain of the victims' families and the insidious way her father had justified each killing to himself. At times, she wept as she wrote, but she kept going, driven by a need to make something honest and meaningful out of the nightmare she'd lived through. When she was done, Emma shared the manuscript with the families of Mark, Sandra, Luis, and Lily, seeking their blessing. Titled The Black Pine Legacy, her memoir laid everything bare from her perspective. A true crime story, yes, but also a personal journey through betrayal, grief, and ultimately resilience. The families thanked her for her transparency and courage. Diane Thompson held Emma's hands and said, "Your father took so much from us, but you, dear, have given something back. You've given us the truth." Emma realized that was the greatest gift she could have hoped to give. On a chilly autumn afternoon, a year after that fateful night, Emma returned to Pinehaven. She walked a quiet trail at the edge of black pine forest, leaves crunching under her feet. Not far from the path, a new wooden sign had been erected, in memory of the lives lost during the Black Pine Killer tragedy, 1998 to 2001. May they rest in peace, and may our community never forget. Fresh flowers lay at its base, evidence that people still came to remember. Emma found a spot under a particularly tall black pine tree. She could see the rooftops of Pinehaven in the distance, and the outline of the old ranger station deeper in the woods. From her pocket, she took out Lily's pendant. For a moment, she considered leaving it here as a token of closure. But instead, she clasped it tightly and spoke aloud, voice steady. "To Lily, Sandra, Mark, and Luis, your stories are known now. You're not forgotten, and I'm so sorry for what happened to you." A breeze stirred the pine branches above as if in acknowledgement. She then added more softly, "And Dad, I hope you found the peace in death that you couldn't find in life. I won't forget the good in you, even if I can never forgive the evil." Those words were the hardest to say, but she felt a weight lift as she uttered them. As Emma left the forest, the sun broke through the clouds, sending golden shafts of light through the black pines. It illuminated the path ahead of her. In that moment, Emma felt that the woods and the town were just woods and a town again, no longer haunted by an unseen killer. The legacy of the Black Pine Killer would never be forgotten, but it no longer had the power to hold Pinehaven or Emma in fear. They had faced the darkness and brought the truth to light. The slow burn of this true crime saga had finally reached its end. The dramatic twist that the Guardian was the menace had been revealed, and while it was shocking and tragic, it was also, in a strange way, freeing. The truth, as harrowing as it was, set an entire community free from a decades-long ghost story. Emma returned home, ready to start a new chapter of her life. In her living room, a first-edition copy of her book sat on the coffee table. Its final lines read like a monologue to an audience that had hung on every word. For years, Black Pine Forest kept a terrible secret. The man responsible for the carnage was hiding in plain sight, a trusted protector who was in fact the source of the terror. Unraveling that secret nearly broke me, because he was my father. But in bringing the truth to light, I believe I've finally laid to rest the ghosts of Black Pine. Sometimes the truth is more shocking than any mystery, yet it is in facing that truth that we find closure. The legacy of the Black Pine Killer is one of heartbreak and horror, but also a testament that even the darkest secrets cannot remain hidden forever. In the end, justice found its way, not in a courtroom, but in the conscience of a daughter who demanded answers. The strange, dark tale of Pinehaven has closed, and with it we step out of the shadow of those black pines, free at last in the light of truth. The truth behind the Black Pine murders wasn't uncovered by a detective or a task force. It was exposed by the killer's own daughter. What began as a long, cold case ended in a confrontation no one could have imagined, where justice didn't come from the law, but from within the family. Sometimes the deepest scars aren't left by the crimes themselves, but by who committed them. Some legacies are written in blood. Others are buried in the woods.
Every story has an end, but here the mysteries never stop. Thank you for watching and being a part of this journey into the unknown. Your support keeps these stories alive, and there's plenty more waiting for you. We drop 3 new stories every week, so if you crave suspense, the unexplained and the downright chilling, make sure you're subscribed and ready for what's next. Until then, keep your lights on, your doors locked, and remember, some stories stay with you long after they're told.